to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We are lucky enough to have with us the renowned former Virginia lacrosse head coach, Dom Starsia. Dom was lucky enough to win 4 championships while he was at Virginia. We're going to talk a little bit about that, his time in the PLL, and what he's doing now with Blue Ridge Academy. He started out as a Long Island native and ended up starting his coaching career at Brown University, where he played. And I think you're going to find out some interesting facts about Dom and the process of how he became one of the legendary coaches. This was a very fun interview to conduct, and I learned a lot about a guy that I think you're going to enjoy this interview. So stay tuned, listen up, and I think you're going to learn a bunch about the locker room, what it means to have a great coach, and a little bit about Dom Starsia. We'll be back in a second. Welcome back to another edition of the Michigan Lacrosse Review. My name is Greg Norman, your host. We're lucky enough to have with us the renowned and legendary Dom Starsia, former Virginia head coach, former Brown head coach. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Pleasure to be here, Greg. I'm happy to lend a hand, and I think we'll have some fun doing this.
Yeah. Well, we usually start with an easy question, and I want to take you all the way back to Valley Stream Central High School as a football player, and you were a wide receiver that went to Brown to play football. So you're a Long Island guy, right?
Long Island guy, first generation to go to college. My dad was a New York City cop, and even though I grew up on Long Island, for whatever reason, Valley Stream didn't have lacrosse in those days, and so we were a little oasis of ignorance in the lacrosse world, surrounded by actually Sewanaka, Lynbrook, and Elmont that were great lacrosse towns. And as hard as it may be to believe, I'd never seen it before I got to Brown. Clearly, I had heard of it, but I'd never seen the game, and I benefited from the fact that you had to play on freshman teams in your first year, because I wanted to be the captain of the freshman football team that year. And the head lacrosse coach at Brown told the freshman coach, because I had some athletic ability, he said, put that guy in the first midfield. So I was running with the 2 best freshman middies that we had, which really accelerated my development. And I tell people the truth of the matter is I fell in love with the game immediately. I played 2 more years of varsity football, but I was distracted by lacrosse right off the bat.
What were your receiver skills that you think translated into lacrosse?
Well, the easy ones are easy to understand are the drills to get open, as a receiver. I still use the same terminology. I had a move. It was relatively simple in those days, but I had a move in football, which was, and a little sing song in my head was little fake, big fake, go. And so if I wanted to wind up going off to my right, you get a little fake to the right, big jab step to the left, and then off to the right. And that worked for me always in football. And I teach that to my lacrosse guys. We actually, I'm coaching at Blue Ridge School now. We just talked about that just the other day, that same little sing song. And so all the skills, the agility work and catching the ball, soft hands, watching the ball in and stuff, those kind of things also, I think, directly apply. And so, it just worked for me. I played a position in football that was suited to transferred over to lacrosse and vice versa. And again, I just fell in love with the game.
I'm a Lake Placid guy, but I know this for sure. The Valley Stream Central is a really good academic school. And so obviously you go from a great academic school to Brown to go to the Ivy League. So when you're going to Brown, your degree, if I'm not mistaken, your degree's in American civilization. Am I correct?
Right. Well, I started out as I thought I was going to be a history major, and I found that to be a little bit dry. And it was my junior year at Brown when I went to my advisor and said, here's what I got. I don't know what I want to major in. And inadvertently, actually, I had taken a class on the American presidency and an anthropology class on the American Indian. I had taken 2 American history classes. And so he said, you're more than halfway to American civilization major, which I didn't even know existed. And so I said, well, I'll do that. And then I finished up that. And I actually was, I did practice and methods and practice teaching my senior year at Brown. So I was certified to teach coming out of college. And that's probably the direction I would have gone had I not gone into coaching. And it just happened that the first full-time assistant coach at Brown, Bob Scalise, who wound up as the athletic director at Harvard, right. He was the first full-time assistant at Brown, and he was my assistant the 3 years I was on the varsity. He left my senior year, and so the position opened up, and the head coach, really needed a Brown guy, somebody that understood him a little bit, and he wanted a lacrosse guy because he was more of a soccer guy. And so he asked me to come back and be his assistant, and so that's I sort of kind of fell into it a little bit, and And I was, a full-time first assistant in soccer and lacrosse, basically the day I graduated. You'd hardly ever, offer somebody a position like that now with so little experience. And, it was a different time, clearly, but that's how I started out.
I'm curious, I guess this is inside baseball. American civilization, how far back does that study go?
Well, like I say, I did a two semester sequence in American history that went back to the beginning and up until the present time and stuff. And but I was fascinated with, and it contributed to my my love of the game of lacrosse. I was fascinated with the Native American culture. I always had been, and so my best and closest friend on the lacrosse team became a fellow by the name of David White. David was a Mohawk from the St. Regis Reservation in upstate New York. And so again, all of these things kind of coming together for me, finding this game, picking up a stick, feeling like this is just what I'm supposed to be doing. Dave White, loving the Native American roots of the game and all the pieces just fell into place.
Now, I know you obviously is a great coach, but you play at Brown, you pick up defense, you end up in 73, 74, you make first team All-Ivy. You must have had tremendous athletic talent. And then here's the other follow-up question. Isn't it much easier to get good at defense than maybe at midfield or attack?
In those days, we were just starting the defensemen were just starting to cross the midline when I was playing, and so it was just the beginning of taking a midfield head and putting it on a regular pole. I actually, the first 2 years at Brown, I was playing midfield, and but I was playing with a wood stick, and so the defensemen back in those days were using heavy wood sticks, and there were not a lot of guys that were crossing the midline and making plays in the middle of the field. And I'm not saying I was a maverick, but I was one of the first ones that started doing that because I happened to be there at that time when that happened. And it suited me. Truthfully, Greg, I had no checks, for when I started playing defense, but I was athletic. And so I could kind of run around you, cover you on both sides, put the ball on the ground, pick it up, get up the field and all. That was my strength. When I made the U.S. team in 78, which was the tryout was in 77, in the final scrimmage of the tryout, I scored 2 goals, one with a long pole and one with a short pole. And I think that's why I made the team, frankly, is that they saw I was versatile. And so to young players, oftentimes I'd say to guys is to start playing with a short stick. You're more involved in the play. When I see young guys with really long sticks, they don't stick handle enough. It's also, we could take it to the next step and say what the box has brought to us, the indoor game has brought to us. But even just in field lacrosse, it doesn't hurt that young players grew up playing midfield or playing offensive positions and then switch to defense. I think it really helps with the stick handling overall and your sense of attacking in the open field. So I was a midfielder the first 2 years. I worked hard to do that. Ironically, it was the Wednesday before our first game in my junior year when the head coach, Cliff Stevenson, and along with Bob Scalise, who was the assistant, said to me, listen, go in and get a long pole. And so I got moved to defense the Wednesday before our first game. My first game playing defense my junior year was against the University of Virginia. And I played, I covered Tom Duquette, which is a good thing I didn't know who he was, because Tom was a senior that year, a 4-time All-American, and showed me a couple of things that I hadn't seen on the parking lots in Rhode Island, Tom was a real Baltimore guy, really skilled, really good guy. Now lives in the state of Virginia, the longtime head coach at Norfolk Academy. We've been good friends ever since I began, especially since I began coaching at Virginia. And so it's funny how it all kind of came together that way.
Well, as a receiver, I'm assuming he must have saw speed in you to go to defense at that point, being a bit of a freelancer.
Yeah, I agree from friends. I could run, I mean, I was pretty, I was pretty athletic, and combination of I was actually a little bit bigger. I was a wide out, but I was a little bit bigger. But I never was I never loved the contact of football, frankly. And so lacrosse was kind of perfect that way. And so I was a little bit bigger, but I could run, and I had some quickness and all. And so it clearly, but I also, to be honest, in lacrosse, so taken with the game early on. I wanted to be known as more than just an athlete, and so when I'm talking to young kids in particular, I'm always saying to them, are you allowed to be on the wall if it's raining out? Are you allowed to be on the wall if it's a nasty day? And the answer, of course, is yes, you are. And it wouldn't be hard to believe I was on the wall every day when I was in college, when I first started playing lacrosse. And I was on the wall before football practice and on the wall outside the football locker room. Used to drive the football coaches crazy, but that's what I wanted to be doing. And so I took pride in the fact that my skills that I brought my skills along, during the course of my career.
I asked that question because we have a thread of football players coming into our program, and I make some of those kids, especially the safeties and the cornerbacks, we put sticks in their hands and make them defensive short sticks. And when they see that, you can be successful at that, and we also teach them, obviously, that football and soccer or football and lacrosse are watermelons and Ferraris. It's not the same sport. It's a skill sport versus maybe more of a brutalistic sport.
But like we were talking about earlier, a lot of the same physical skills carry over. And so,
right.
I always had a reputation, and maybe it had something to do with my background, is the football lacrosse guy. And so we had, when you think of Ryan Curtis and Brett Hughes, and I had Chris LaPierre, I had some great football players. And so as the game has grown into some of these more remote areas, you hear guys talking about, well, the football coach doesn't want me to play lacrosse. And, if the football coach really actually knew the game, he would know that they fit together, the agility required in lacrosse practice, the fitness level required in lacrosse practice, all the eye-hand stuff that you work on every single day. It's a natural in the football and lacrosse world. Look at the Virginia team right now, that Cade Southstead, that young defenseman from Texas, he had like 400 yards receiving in the state championship game, the last game of his high school football career.
Right.
There's so many of those stories, and you don't have to have been a football player, but over the course of my career, I had so many guys that were really good high school football players, and I think it's a natural.
And a football coach who said that his job was that 10% of the kids play football like to hit, and it was his job to make sure the other 90% felt comfortable. Which I always thought was
that's what I mentioned to you earlier. That's where I fell in. Again, I was a little bit bigger, and so I looked kind of like a rugged guy, and I could run. I could take the contact, but it wasn't my first choice. I would rather run around you. And I love to catch the ball in football. I mean, that's what I think transferred over to lacrosse. I love to catch the ball in space and run with it and all. And so I wasn't one of the guys that went out of their way looking for contact. I was always in awe of the guys that did, frankly. I just never developed that instinct.
Yeah. Well, God gives us all a little bit. And with me, I had all the talent except he said, you're going to be slow. So there's always those factors. Yep. Just as a weird question. You played the North-South senior game.
Yep.
That used to be a huge deal.
Yeah.
It is not the rainbow that it was. I'm just curious why.
And actually, my senior year, the North-South game, we played in Atlanta, Georgia. They flew us down to Atlanta, and we played down there, and it was a big deal. I think it's there's a couple different things that have contributed to the games being diminished a little bit. One is the Final Four, is that the Final Four now goes so late, and the players, it's such a big deal, and it wasn't that long ago when we had 50,000 people on, for each of those two, the semifinal and final days. And it was such a big deal for those guys. And it was such a climax of their season that it was hard to say, okay, now we're going to turn around and you're going to go, travel the very next week. You're going to go travel off someplace and go play in an all-star game. It just didn't mean that much, and a lot of guys want to take some time off when the season was over. And so the end of the season and the playing of the North-South game were pretty close to each other. And so for the top guys in Division I, the guys that were playing on that final weekend, the North-South game became a little bit anticlimactic. But then I think a bigger thing was the MLL, was just professional lacrosse, which was now as soon as your season ended, you're in the mix for either trying out for an MLL position, now a PLL, but an MLL spot, and there had tryouts and all, and that was a much bigger deal for guys than going off to play in the North-South game. And so I think it was just a combination of those things, and the game just kind of did to me. And it wasn't that long ago, or was that long ago, that it was the focus of things at the end of the season. And I think between the pros and the Final Four, there were just other things that got people's attention, and I think the game itself lost a little bit of its luster.
So you have this great career. You're looking at maybe being a teacher. You kind of decide for the next 10 years after college to hang around Brown. One of which is also being a soccer coach the first 4 or 5 years. So what was the allure of hanging around university until you became the head coach and lacrosse coach?
Again, I was, first generation. Neither of my parents went to college. I was the first of all my cousins and everything to go off to college. And my father, who asked me after I graduated for years and years, would say to me, by the way, when are you going to get a real job? What are you doing? What are you doing coaching? I sent you to an Ivy League school. I didn't send you to an Ivy League school to be a coach. And people would be saying to me, my peers would be saying to me, hey, Dom, Ivy League guys don't stay in coaching, and so it was 3 years after I graduated that I applied to business schools. And some of the time I got into a couple of ACC schools, and I just assumed I was going to go to business school, only because everybody kept saying that's what I was supposed to be doing. And the exercise of applying and getting accepted and thinking about doing it, Greg, it helped me to realize, I hate that stuff. I don't want to do that. And I was starting to enjoy the coaching. And I met somebody who was going to be a doctor and instead decided to be a nurse. And so between the two of us, her being a nurse and me being a coach, we began to see that, geez, maybe we can put this life together. And she loved what I did. And so that's what happened. And so you're right. I'm coaching soccer too. I literally had never kicked a soccer ball before the day. We grew up nowadays, even football kids play some soccer growing up, but there was no soccer on Long Island in those days.
No.
Everybody played football, basketball, and baseball in my town. And so I'm coaching soccer, and we went to the Final Four in soccer 2 of my first 3 years coaching. So I'm the first assistant on one of the best soccer teams in the country. It was like, holy moly, I must be good at this. I don't even know what I'm doing, I learned to enjoy soccer and developed a love for soccer. I coached soccer for probably 6 or 7 years. I was the assistant coach for 8 years. I started to fade away from soccer toward the end of my assistant coaching career. And then I had been there. I'd gone through a couple of head coaching searches. I actually, you may not be aware of this, I was the head coach at Yale for a day. And in 1981, Bob McHenry retired, and they had a search, and I was offered the job. The athletic director in those days at Yale was a former NFL quarterback by the name of Frank Ryan. And they offered me the job, and they wanted me to be an assistant football coach.
Right.
And a varsity football assistant coach and a head lacrosse coach. And so, but it was a raise and a promotion, obviously, at a great school. And so I said yes, and I'm going to do it. And that night that I accepted the position, I went back to work at a camp that I had been at. Everybody's congratulating me. I'm the new head coach at Yale. And Dick Garber, the former head coach at University of Massachusetts, who I greatly respected, pulled me aside that evening and said to me, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You don't seem happy about this, Dom." I said, "Dick," I said, "the truth is, I really don't want to coach football, but at Yale, they wanted to fill a varsity football coaching position, without having any count against the football staff."
Right.
And he said to me, Dick Garber was the first one who said to me, "Dom, don't take it." He said, you're good at this. You're going to find something else. And I went back the next day. I called Mr. Ryan up, and I went back and said, "I need to talk to you." And I went back to see him again. And I said, "Look, I can't do it. I don't want to be the varsity football coach." I said, "Tell you what, make me the freshman football coach. I'll coach freshman football and varsity lacrosse." And he said, no, let's do the opposite. Start on the varsity football. If it doesn't work out, I told him I would move up to the varsity once I got the lacrosse team going. And he said, no, let's do it the other way. Start on the varsity football. If it doesn't work out, we'll move you down to freshman football. And I said, I can't do that. And then they I turned the position down, and they offered it to Mike Waldvogel, who wound up doing a great job. And Mike followed that. Mike started on varsity football, eventually became freshman football, and then just became their lacrosse coach over time and stuff. And but I turned on the next year. The next year, the Princeton job opens up, and I'm a finalist for the job. And that's the job I really wanted. And I didn't get it. They wound up giving it to Jerry Schmidt. And so I was really disappointed. And I walked into my athletic director at Brown's office, John Parry, and said, John, look, nothing for nothing. I've been an assistant here for 8 years. I'm going to get out of coaching. I said, I got to do something else. I can't keep doing this. And he said, Dom, listen, stick with me. I got something in mind. And a month or two later, he figured he worked it out so that I would take over the lacrosse program at Brown. And so you just, you never quite know how these things are going to work out. And that's how it did with me, And so I might have been at Yale, I might have been at Princeton, and I wound up getting the head coaching position at my alma mater, where I spent the next 10 years.
Do you remember when you thought in the back of your brain, despite Dad and everybody else, when you could be a full-time coach as a profession? You remember that point?
I wouldn't say it was a specific moment. I just think I came to the realization. I also thought when I first started, even after I first started coaching and knew I was going to do this for a while, I think I assumed I was going to be an administrator, that I would switch over there. And I just thought that was kind of the natural route. And then, Greg, the longer I coached, the more I realized this is what I love. Maybe I have a gene defect, but I much preferred the atmosphere of a locker room to a boardroom, and so the longer I coached, the more I learned that this is who I am. This is what I love doing. And even when I retired from Brown in 2016, I coached in the pros for a couple of years. We can talk about that, but it wasn't the right fit for me. It wasn't. What I loved about coaching was walking in the locker room at 3:00 in the afternoon, being in the weight room with the guys, getting out on the practice field, yapping at guys on the practice. I love the process of coaching. And frankly, what I'm doing at the Blue Ridge School right now is a better fit for me than what I happen to be doing with the pros. I loved being around those guys, and it was fun watching them and working with them. You had a great seat for an all-star game every weekend, frankly. But the Blue Ridge kids now, it's kind of old school. Even though I never coached in high school, I'm doing everything, coaching at both ends, chasing the balls, but I really enjoy that, and so I'm in my element, and I just grew into realizing that this is what I want to be doing. And, again, I think for young coaches in particular, being married to somebody that knew what I did and loved what I did, and wanted to be part of that life was really important. Again, I talk to young coaches all the time. I had 4 kids under 4, 2 with special needs, and I was the head lacrosse coach at Brown, and my wife was a nurse. And so when coaches say, "How did you do it?" I say to them, I say, "Don't try to picture it, because you just can't imagine it. Just understand that if you love each other and this is the life you want to lead, you're going to figure it out. You can make it work." But when I look back to it now, I think, holy moly, how did we live through that?
It doesn't change. I've coached 3 high school teams, a club lacrosse team, and held a full-time job at 67. And I've done that for 25 years. And I schedule my own schedule, right? So I'm able to work out the scheduling part. Somebody says, well, I can't do this or can't do that. It's something to do with our age. But let me back up just briefly.
Yep.
We come out of a generation where our parents thought we should have a skill as it relates to, hand skill, be a carpenter, be something along those lines. So for me, being a writer, for you being a coach, that's something that was hard for this generation to understand and overcome, because they just don't understand it wasn't the pressure, is that they wanted something concrete that, you could fall back on. And coaching, writing, art, anything along those lines wasn't really, in our parents' minds, considered to be workable. Is that a fair?
It's a fair thing. My dad was a New York City cop, and then on the side he had a contracting business, and so I learned to work with my hands. I can do enough carpentry and plumbing and electrical work to be dangerous. But what I learned from my father, and it's just that it manifests itself in a different way these days. What I learned from my father was how to work hard. Our dads worked 2 jobs. My father was always working. We hardly ever vacationed. Now, I didn't feel like I was missing out on anything at the time, but I watched the guy who worked really hard. That's what I learned from him, and so now I went to Brown, but I was a full financial aid kid. I had to work all summer in order to be able to afford to go to college. I don't recall that I got a dime from my parents because they didn't have a dime,
Right.
and we didn't feel like we were poor, but we just didn't have any extra income. And so I had to work in the summer in order to supplement the financial aid I was getting in order to be able to go to Brown. I worked in a Key Food warehouse for 2 summers, Key Food in Brooklyn, and that's just the way it was. And so now, and when I first started coaching, it was a big deal to be able to get a kid a summer job. I'll get you a construction summer job and you'll make $10 an hour. Now, I don't think any of these college guys work with their hands. All they're concerned about is an internship. I want experience.
Right.
I don't want
Right.
to work. And I'm not blaming anybody. It's just the way the world has changed. We learn to, like you're describing, we learn to work with our hands to do the hard skills. These kids now, it's more of an intellect thing. And I'll be honest with you, Greg, they make so much money, these young guys now, that they can pay somebody else, to do the work, and that's just the way it is.
Well, I was a GA at the Division I football program, and I was also had a journalism degree, and I got a job offer from the New York Times with $75 a week more in those days than it was being a GA living in a dorm. So I thought, well, okay, $75 a week still turns out to be $300 a month, which was a car payment, or a little less than that. So sometimes it's a practical decision, and you're able to do a vocation and an avocation, and that kind of all works out.
I made $9,000 my first job, my first year at Brown as the assistant soccer and lacrosse. I was the first assistant in soccer, the first assistant in lacrosse. I was the first head women's soccer coach at Brown. In the fall, I ran fall lacrosse by myself. I would go to women's soccer practice because I was their head coach, and I would be at the men's soccer practices almost every day. And again, making $9,000, which at that time it seemed like a fair wage, and it grew from there. So.
When at the end of the Brown decade, you guys in your last year, I think quarterfinals, you qualified for the NCAA, went to the quarters. Is that correct?
3 years, we were really good. My last 3 years, 90, 91, 92. 91, we were undefeated, actually the number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, and wound up losing to a Maryland team that came and beat us in the quarterfinals. The next year, 92 was that we won a first round. Oh, we beat Loyola. That was the year that we had a game at Loyola in the first round, and Oliver Marty had 9 goals in the quarterfinal. Darren Lowe was 2-8 in the game, and Oliver Marty, who's now running the Firewolves franchise in the NLL. They both tore it up that day, and then we lost to Carolina in the quarters, I guess. We must have beaten Loyola in the first round and then lost to Carolina in the quarters in 92, and then that's the year I got the job at Virginia. And that's that spring. I have a book out that's I hope you'll be very happy is the title of the book, and the title comes from coming home one day that spring very innocently and just mentioned to my wife that I heard today that Jim Adams was going to retire at the end of the year. And Chrissy said to me, I hope you'll be very happy, implying that I don't care, we're not going anywhere. And
Right.
I said, Chrissy, if you ever write a book, that's going to be the title of the book. And, so that's the way it played out.
Just was Jamie Monroe or Lars, did you recruit both those players?
Jamie. Well, they what?
You recruited both those players to play at Brown.
And Jamie, and who was the other one?
Lars Tiffany.
Oh yeah, Lars, Jamie, Darren Lowe, all that crowd. Yep, Lars was a 2-year captain for me. A little bit slow defenseman, but really smart and a good leader. Did a great job. Jamie was an animal, just an athlete, a big, strong attackman, left-handed. The same way he is now, he was as a player, which was that he was always trying to find out what's a more creative way to do this, and. I can remember we beat a really good Penn team one night. We were up a goal late in the game. Jamie was coming around the goal. I knew what he had in mind, and I'm thinking to myself, no, Jamie. And he sticks it behind his back in the far upper corner, and you're going, yes, Jamie, way to go, And he'd drive you a little crazy, but he was great, and we remain close to this day. I talk to those guys all the time, and so that by the end of my my last couple of years, I had some really good teams at Brown. Darren Lowe was in the National Hall of Fame. Jamie, Andy Towers played for me. Jay McMahon. I had some really fine players.
J.J. Bear was probably as good as anybody you've coached.
Well, J.J. Bear was on my Virginia teams, but
Right.
I tell people that the two most talented players I ever coached in a long career were Jalbert and Towers. Andy Towers and Jalbert. Towers was another one like Jalbert, 6'3", in excess of 200 pounds, quick, both hands, unstoppable. And both those guys would have been an All-American at any position on the field. You had handed Jalbert a long pole or Towers the same, they would have figured something out, And if Andy had spent 10% of the time thinking about his academics that he spent thinking about lacrosse, he would have graduated Phi Beta Kappa at the same time, so.
Andy's been very instrumental in allowing us to get to a number of PLL guys. So I appreciate what a good guy he is as well.
Andy and I have always gotten along great, and he was so good. He didn't do much his freshman year in college at Brown, but his sophomore year, we had him playing attack, and he set the school scoring record, goal scoring record, single season goal scoring record that year. And then his next year, we made him a midi, and he was first team All-American. And Jalbert kind of followed the same route. We had, when Jalbert in the spring of '98, going into the fall of '98, I had my three attackmen returned: Jalbert, Drew McKnight, and Tucker Radebaugh. And I had Connor Gill on the way as a freshman. I knew Connor was really good. And so I needed to leave Tucker on the attack because he was a left hand, and we needed a left hand on the attack. Drew McKnight had shoulder surgery that fall, and so I couldn't work with him in a new position. So I went to Jay and said, Jay, you get the booby prize. We need to move you to midfield. And, he resisted at first. He didn't really want to do it. And then that spring, we won our first national championship in 27 years. Jay was the midfielder of the year and first team All-American the next 2 years. And, those kind of stories are stories I tell my players now about the sacrifices that sometimes you have to make in order to put a team together. And like I say, when you can put the team above yourself, at the end of the day, you often achieve things individually that you never even imagined were going to be possible, so.
Culture's somewhat important, to the least. So you have finalists for some jobs at Brown. Obviously, Virginia comes on the map. Talk us through the Virginia and the opportunity, and then what's it like going from New York and in the Ivy League down to the South?
Yeah, like I said, I hadn't really thought about leaving Brown. We were very happy. My wife had gone to Brown. My 4 kids were all born in Rhode Island. When we finally did move to Virginia, my son was 9 or 10. He didn't talk to me for 2 years. He was very unhappy about going to UVA and about going to Virginia. But I had just had my 40th birthday, and I felt like if we didn't take this opportunity, we were going. We probably were going to stay at Brown our whole lives, and we were young enough to start out on another adventure. And so. And we also knew that, in Rhode Island, most of my children's friends, while my kids were enrolled in public schools as middle school students, almost every one of their friends went to private school, high schools. And not that we were opposed to that necessarily, but in getting to, when we went and took a look at Charlottesville, we saw that the kids were going to be able to stay in the public schools nearby. The public schools in the Charlottesville area were really good. A big factor for me when I went to Virginia, the Virginia people contacted me. I was flattered that they did. I was happy to go talk to them. And I'll tell you, the first thing I said to them was, I said, look, this is really not going to have anything to do with lacrosse. This is going to be whether or not this is the right thing for me and my family. I said, I got a complicated family situation. Again, I had 4 children, 2 with special needs. We had fought in Rhode Island. We had fought for 2 years. They were busing all the special needs kids across town to one facility in Rhode Island. I had identical twin girls with special needs, and we didn't want that. So we fought with the Rhode Island people for 2 years because we wanted the girls in the neighborhood public school. And right at the end, they said, okay, we're going to let the girls come to the neighborhood schools. And then we moved, and so Maggie and Emma never started school in Rhode Island. But when I went to Virginia, so that when I flew down to Virginia to interview, they insisted that Chrissy come with me, my wife. And so I spent the day on campus, talking to lacrosse people and people at the university. Chrissy spent the day in the public schools in the Virginia area. And by the end of the day, we knew that Charlottesville was well ahead of where we were in Rhode Island for services for the girls in particular. And so they were going to benefit from that move. And so, it was, by the end of the day, it was sort of a no-brainer. The lacrosse piece of it, I loved Brown. But, the truth of the matter is simply that you're going to be able to sort of compete at a little higher level. And so you get to ply your wares at that level. And we just came to discover that Charlottesville was going to be a good place to raise the kids and have the kids, do their education and the services for Maggie and Emma. And that's the way it's been. As good a move as the coaching piece was over the 25 years that I coached at UVA, my girls, Maggie and Emma, started in first grade in the public schools here, and their run through 14 years of school was as good as anything that had to do with coaching UVA. I mean, the girls just had a great run through the public school system, and now we have found this wonderful group home setting where they live, and that's why Charlottesville is going to be our permanent home, because Maggie and Emma live about 20 minutes away in this wonderful place called Innisfree Village. And we're blessed to have found it and be able to afford it. And that's where the girls live. And so from a family standpoint, it was the right thing for us.
Well, it's a blessing, certainly. When I talked to Kevin Corrigan and Mike Carnavana, they talk about the Great Virginia programs. You were there after they went to school, I'm assuming.
Yep. Yes.
Where was Virginia in your mind nationally as reputation in '93?
Yeah, Mike Caravana was actually my assistant at Brown for 2 years. My first assistant at Brown was Michael O'Neill, who graduated as Hopkins' all-time leading scorer. If you remember Michael from Massapequa. And then he was with me for 3 years, and then he left, and then Mike Caravana came on for 2 years. And so I remained very friendly with Mike to this day, and I've obviously grown to know Kevin well over the years. I'll be honest, frankly, when I first got to Virginia, the word on the street was the Virginia team is soft. And I don't think they were necessarily talking about the physical piece of the lacrosse. The sense of it was that they are not willing to do what's required in order to be successful, and we heard that a lot, and at that point, when I got here, Virginia hadn't won a championship in 20 years, been close a couple of times, but hadn't won a championship in 20 years. And so we had to, turn around and get that change. I'm not a big fan of the word culture, but you're bringing your own sense of what's important, the values that are important to you to a program. And I was a public school kid, a football kid, and, like to think of myself as kind of tough, and, to have to keep hearing about people talking about, the program is soft, and,
Long Island.
Right away, in the recruiting, my first class was Doug Knight and Michael Watson and Tommy Smith, and these were the best of the best. These were tough kids, and nobody was tougher than Doug Knight, as an attackman, as a lacrosse player, and I thought, you're only really get credit when you win the last game. Well, in 2 of my first 4 years, we lost in overtime in the championship game, and so I think that's an indication of some toughness anyway. We came back. My first year that we got to the finals, which was my second year at UVA, we were down 5 in the fourth quarter and 2 men down to start the fourth quarter against Syracuse, and came back and won in double overtime. I remember an alum, maybe it was Kevin Pelkey, I ran into him after the game. He said, I didn't know we were capable of that, talking about Virginia, and so we tried to change some things around. And then, frankly, we took the last step when with Tucker Radebaugh and some guys that were key parts of our first championship team in '99, Jal Bear and Ryan Curtis and Tucker Radebaugh and Drew McKnight. And from 94 probably until 2012, which is 18 years, we were one of the programs. We had a lot of tough kids, played a lot of great lacrosse games, and you think of all those classic games with Syracuse over the years, and so we had to fight that stereotype in the beginning, and we probably didn't get credit for having crossed that hurdle until we finally won in '99. I would suggest that we probably got over that earlier than that, but that's when people began to acknowledge that there's something going on in Charlottesville.
long career, 4 championships at Virginia. Is it harder to build to a championship team or harder to maintain in your mind as a coach?
I think the easy answer to that would be that it's harder to maintain. It's hard to stay on top of that mountain, and I think the reason for that is I'm not sure that it's actually harder, except that everybody's expectations are now different.
Right.
And so the window by which you measure success now becomes so narrow
Right.
that, I had teams at Brown that were 8-5 and people thought, wow, Don, that's great. Really nice season you had, and so, but 12-4 at UVA but losing in the semifinals and, in some people's mind, you came up short. And, you look at all the teams, we'll talk about toughness, how about Maryland over the years? Tough enough for everybody, it was 40 years between their national championships. They were 0-9 in national championship games before they won in 2017. People sort of, say, oh, they came up short or they lacked something. You want to say, please, they maintained that level of play over all that time. And just because they didn't win that last game, so, but when you're up, when your expectation is to be in that company on the final weekend, it makes life a little bit more complicated, especially for the players. I think coaches know how to work with it a little bit, but for young guys, players, almost always, a lack of confidence is a much bigger factor than overconfidence. You look at guys at that level, that final weekend level, and you're thinking, oh, they must all really be confident. It's more of the confidence is a fragile thing. And so when you keep saying to guys, why haven't you won in 40 years? Or, you guys, you can't win, it makes their life a little bit more challenging than it would have been otherwise. And it's probably unfair, but it's also the way of the world. That's just, we have scoreboards and we watch them and coaches get paid, and that's the way it is.
My memory is a little thin. 6 or 11, did you switch to the zone defense? Was it 11?
It was 11. Yeah, it was 11 when we lost our best defenseman, Matt Lovejoy, in the middle of the season and made the change.
Now, I ran a 3-3 in those days because I was a box guy. I didn't know as much as I needed to know. And all of a sudden, the validation that Virginia's going to win a national championship with a 3-3, I could at least smile a little bit and gloat. But it kind of take us through, and I say that because I think you're as good a tactician as maybe it's ever coached the game. And my point to that is, did the process come from the soccer and may having been played football? But talk us through the 3-3 and what goes through your mind when you're going to have to make those kind of changes, knowing that you're headed to a potential championship.
Yeah, and as a coach, as a lacrosse coach in particular, you're sort of often left with the Bill Belichick, John Wooden thing. Right. Bill Belichick, who's going to change for every opponent, going to prepare for every game, and John Wooden, who's saying, we don't scout, we play, we worry about ourselves only. Right. Okay, well, Coach Wooden, with all due respect, Bill Walton is handing the ball to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, is handing it to Sidney Wicks, and you have these unbelievable teams, and all you need to, not that all you need to do, but get those guys to the game on time, and you're probably going to be okay, and most of us live somewhere in the middle, and what happened in that particular year was the truth of the matter is that we were struggling in the middle of the season a little bit, and we're about to play North Carolina, and their best attackman was Billy Bitter, who was really good. And so I'm sitting in the office. We had just lost to Maryland on Monday, and which now on Saturday. Now we're sitting in the office on Monday, and I can remember talking to my assistant coaches saying, how are we going to cover Billy Bitter? And then my defenseman, Matt Lovejoy, walks in the office. He was our best defenseman. And he said to me, Coach, I want that Bitter matchup. His arm is in a sling, however, and I said, why don't we wait and see what your injury is first before we decide how we're going to match up in a game like this, And so he was going to the doctor the next day. So now it's Tuesday, and the trainer comes into me and says, I got bad news. Not only does Matt need surgery, he's going to have surgery tomorrow. He's out for the year.
Right.
And so now you're sitting there thinking, now what are we going to do with Billy Bitter? And so it was Tuesday or Wednesday when I just said, okay, look, I used to run a zone more when I was back at Brown. Let's try that, and so we went into practice on Tuesday or Wednesday and trying the zone defense. And to be honest with you, Greg, we were awful the first couple of days, and I went to the point where we had a team study hall one night during the week. Let's say it was Wednesday night, and I used to go to it to get everybody's attention. And Adam Gittleman said to me, and I need to talk to you outside. And so we're out in the hallway, and he's literally in tears, saying to me, "Coach, we stink. We can't do that," And I said, "Adam, just hang in with me for a little bit," And so the next day is Thursday, and so right at the end of Thursday's practice, the last 10 minutes, it looked like I think we got it. I think we understand what we're trying to do here, So now it's Friday, and the game the next day against North Carolina is going to be on ESPN. Actually, there's only 2 games the entire year on the mothership on ESPN. This is one of the games.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there again in my office with my assistant coaches saying, "Fellas, do we have the nerve to play a zone on national television that we've never used before?" And so I just decided, okay, let's just try it. And there's no doubt in that first game that we benefited from the fact that North Carolina had no idea it was coming and hadn't really prepared. And they were so, I don't want to say overconfident, but they just started shooting the ball from everywhere. And Adam was seeing the ball. And so we were getting a lot of things we could handle on defense. And we won the game in overtime, and so literally we made the playoffs, frankly, I think because of that game. And we went forward playing the zone into the playoffs. And even in the quarterfinals, we played Cornell at Hofstra. I don't think Cornell believed that we were going to play a zone. And they didn't seem like they were happy about it. And we wound up clobbering them in that game and then went on to obviously to win. And in the championship game, we almost always thought we started out man-to-man. And Catalino scored a goal in the first minute. You go back and watch the tape. Catalino scores in the first minute of the game against our man-to-man. Timeout, get in the zone, play the zone the rest of the game, and win the championship, And so going back to it, though, what I would suggest to you is that what we discovered was, born of necessity, is that we had exactly the right people to play a zone. Okay. We had a long stick midi, Bray Malfris, who was not a real nifty long stick midi. We put him in the crease in the middle of the zone where all you want to do is bust heads in there, Right. That was a perfect role for him. It gave us a spot to put Chris Clemens as the pole in the middle of the defense, with the quarterback of it all. And he was a really smart player. It was perfect for him and stuff. And so again, my little quip is I tell guys, after that season, I got a lot of calls about the zone, speak at the clinic about the zone, this and that. And I'd always preface it by saying, fellas, I need for you to understand, if you stink playing man-to-man, you are probably going to stink playing a zone. The zone is not going to cover up stuff if you don't talk and you don't anticipate and you don't work together. And the zone worked for us because we had the right people, and everybody was, and frankly, our team was so afraid of who we were that they were so open to any information we gave them. Do this, fellas. Yeah, let's try that, coach, because we're in trouble right now, and so guys were open to it. Adam was seeing the ball, and we had the right people to run a zone, and it just worked for us. And so we get to the end of the season, we switched on offense too. We lost a couple guys on offense. We went to the 2-man game. We slowed the game down. We said to guys, okay, look, here's the deal. Every time that, and this, I'll give Coach Van Arsdale credit for this. Every time down on offense, Steele touches the ball. And again, everybody said, okay, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So we gave Steele the ball. We ran a short stick back there, played a little 2-man game for Steele, made the other team react to that situation, and then played off of that. And again, so we win the national championship. People are saying to me, Dom, what a great plan you had. It was like, are you kidding me or what? All we were trying to do is get to tomorrow, and it just kind of snowballed. We had the right people to play a zone. The slowing the ball down and getting the ball to Steele worked for us. And and we were able to pull it off. You know, it did wind up being a great story at the end of the day. But it was, like I say, it was completely born of necessity. I just didn't think, frankly, I thank Billy Bitter. Billy, I don't think we could have covered you, if we'd stayed in the man-to-man.
All four of those championships are terrific, but does the 11 stick out a little bit because of the sort of
The 11 sticks out because of all. I mean, there are seasons that don't result in champion. I try to tell this to people. There are seasons that did not result in championships that wound up being just wonderful seasons. Our 2015 season, we had a team that was devastated with injuries, and we wound up, won 10 games, had a home game in the playoffs, wound up losing in the first round, but that was a great season. But those, that 2011 one, because of all of that, all the melodrama around it and all of that. 2006, though, we talked about it a little bit earlier. We were number one in the preseason, and we were undefeated national championships, undefeated national champions. And so to ride that from beginning to end, that's notable. And had a lot of great guys on that team, great leaders on that team, and that was a team that enjoyed themselves, enjoyed each other, fun to work with, but nothing got in the way of the lacrosse. And they were really focused on it and stuff. And again, my job there was to get them to the field on time. That they were. And that Kyle Dixon and Matt Ward and Mike Culver and Ricky Smith and Kip Turner and Ben Rubio, Danny Gladding, so many great players on that team that it was just a fun group to be around. The first championship obviously holds a special place. And I've been telling lots of stories about the 2003 championship team with Chris Rotelli. And, I was just telling the story, Billy Gladding. Billy Gladding should have played on our first offensive midfield. I asked him to play on the defensive midfield. He didn't want to at first, and then he wound up doing it. And, he scored more goals as a senior on the defensive midfield than he did the first 3 years combined. He scored 5 goals in the ACC championship game. Was the MVP of the ACC championship. Covers Hopkins' best attackman in the national championship game that year. And we told him, Billy, we're not coming to you, and we won the national championship. And, I talk about to teams about selflessness. Everybody's got to make a sacrifice. For some guy, it might just be shooting overhand, that we want you to do that. Or for another guy, it's playing a different position or doing this or doing it. Everybody's got to be willing to do the things that the team needs. And so I just was telling that story in the last day or two to my Blue Ridge kids. And, so there are lots of great moments, And then when I was at High Point 2 years ago or 3 years ago, talking to the High Point team, and one of the kids in the locker room after the practice asked me, what are the highlights of your career? And I said, well, there were lots of great games that it was great to be a part of, and certainly some wonderful championships. I said, but at the same time, fellas, I would tell you that nothing made me happier than being at Zed Williams' graduation from Virginia, and those kind of things, which I talk to Zed all the time, those kind of things, which, the trophies are on the shelf and I love them, and there's some great memories there, but I'm talking to Zed, I'm talking to Matt Ward, Ben Rubio calls me all the time about this and about that and stuff. I mean, those are the things that you really cherish and continue to live with and grow with, even beyond all the games.
From the outside looking in, we think of you as a tactician and that kind of thing. In your head, are you better on the whiteboard or better from the heart?
It's not even close, Greg, for me personally. I loved the whiteboard stuff, but and we had our whiteboard moments that, that 2011 season, was a whiteboard moment. That 2003 season, we went into that final game and we triple pulled Hopkins in the finals. We had never done it during the season. They had that midfield of Doniger and Harrison and Boland and won the national championship and stuff. And so I'm always proud of those kind of things, but we are in a people business. We are in a relationship business. And those are the most meaningful things. When you are able to get to a point where you're willing to show people that you're vulnerable, that you're hurting, that you have moments. I have special needs children, it gave my players an easy way to connect with my family, for them to reach out with the girls, and the girls just loved being around the players and stuff. And, and to watch Zed Williams, who no one traveled further from saying, I'll come to Virginia to being at graduation, both academically and socially, coming right off the reservation, being the only one of 10 in his family to go to college and graduate. And, those kind of things. That's the most meaningful thing. I get around to colleges now. I remember being at Ohio State a couple of years ago, and they practice on the football field, and they have 3 or 4 towers. Each of the towers has a camera. The coaches have iPads on the field, and I was at High Points practice, and the manager was operating the drone while practice was going on, taking these great pictures and stuff. And I would tell the coaches, all of that stuff, fellas, it's great. The information is wonderful. It's only going to help you, I said, but don't lose track of the fact that we're in the people business, that you still got to connect with these kids. You need for them to trust you in order to get the most out of them and all. And so to be able to gain that trust, you need to be able to connect on a personal level. And so I still believe that that's the fundamental piece of coaching, is to develop that bond of trust. And that's the way you're going to get the most out of your team. And for them to have the most profound experience overall.
Your experience with your daughters and your children, but specifically with your daughters, does that soften the heart as that tough Long Island guy that came to Virginia with the Brown?
Greg, I don't mean to be melodramatic. I mean, they are just angels. I mean, they have the most wonderful personalities. You ask anybody that's been connected to the Virginia program about Maggie and Emma, and that their face will immediately go to a big smile, because the girls just loved being around them. Again, I was telling the Blue Ridge kids just the other day, there was an article written about Chris Rotelli around the 2003 season. And Rotelli was talking about, he said, I loved when Maggie and Emma came around the corner for practice, because I knew coach would stop yelling at us, and it was probably true. It's just such a joy for me to have them around and stuff. And from the beginning, for me, and it's related to what we've talked about in the very, very beginning of all this, which was that, having 4 kids and coaching and all of these things, my family was part of my life. People talk about how'd you separate coaching and family. I did not separate it. I didn't try to separate it. A psychologist might have a field day with me, but there was too much time required of everything. It had to work together. It couldn't be separated. And so if the people at Virginia had a problem with, Maggie and Emma or Molly and Joe in the office, then I got a problem, because they were going to be part of it. Joe traveled with us for the early games. And I remember Coach Van Arsdale, Owen Van Arsdale, grew up in our locker room. I used to tell the guys, I said, when you're picking out music for the locker room, think about Owen Van Arsdale, who was a 10-year-old at the time, those kind of things. And that's what it's all about. That's the life we want to live. And coaches are getting paid better. I got paid better at the end than I did earlier in my career, but it never was about the money. It was about loving what we were doing and enjoying the people that we were around, so there's no doubt about that.
I get it. I was a guy who never had a sister nor a daughter, and I ended up coaching 10 years at Michigan State, the women's team. Having never watched a women's game in my entire life, ended up actually as the president of the National WCLA board. But anybody that knew me would have told you that I remember driving home the first year, crying in the car because I couldn't get 35 girls to do the same thing at the same time. And I think that's part of it. And I think it made me a better coach, a better person, because you had to listen better. And I think that's part of it. Before I get to the Chrome stuff, I just was really curious about one thing. Steele Stanwyck he had a move, sort of goal line extended, a dodge from there. It was something he did kind of unusual. And I don't know that it was I never saw anybody do that before. Is that something that he just did naturally, or is that something that you guys figured out that it was just a good place to come from, disrupt the defense?
He came to us with magnificent skills, which he had honed. It's a fable almost, the story of him in the garage wall that his father had painted a lacrosse goal in, and he's probably the most two-handed player in the game since maybe Jeff Long back in the day, in my day almost. A quick Steele story would be that so he's coming to UVA as a freshman, along with Chris Bocklett, and we have Danny Gladding and Garrett Billings returning. Danny was going to be our ex-guy. Garrett was a Canadian, a righty, could barely even put the stick in his left hand. I wrote to Bocklett and Steele that summer and said, fellas, anytime you can spend with a stick in your left hand this summer is probably going to benefit you getting on the field quicker, and it's going to benefit the team because I need somebody to play over on that left-handed side. And the very first fall practice, and I think Steele would corroborate this story, the very first fall practice, we were doing a little 3v2 drill from behind the goal. And in the front of the left-handed line Steele was standing there. And the very first time I ever saw him shoot a ball at UVA, he came up left-handed, dropped his hands, shot the ball low to high, and tucked it right in the corner, and looked over at me like, hey, I'm going to take care of this for you. Don't worry about it, And
Right.
I think he had close to 40 goals that year, most of them left-handed. And he was a right-handed player, And so his ability, I think he may have been more comfortable in his left hand, actually, as his career went on. But we very rarely, even with the best ones, we very rarely see a kid that's got both hands the way that he did. And so, again, you probably best served to talk to Coach Van Arsdale about the fine points of what the two of them talked about. But you feel like, we put Steele in an environment where his skills could thrive, but he did a lot of those things on his own, I believe.
Just to exit out with Virginia, I don't want to get into. There's been plenty written and talked about the exit and how it happened. The only question I want to ask is, Craig Littlepage had a lot to do with the exit, but my question to you is, with the groundswell of support at the end before you resigned, I have to think in the back of your brain, after all that time you spent in Virginia, that had to have been a real heartwarming thing for you and the family.
Yeah, it was, it was very gratifying, and the end was probably just a little bit more awkward than it needed to be, it's right at the end of the season. Maybe I got my back up a little bit. You're tired and beat up from a long season, and my experience at Virginia was positive, and so many great people, throughout my career, and I know, and like I say, I've been doing some really cool things since I left,
Yeah.
and so I probably wouldn't be as involved in Harlem as I am. And, you want to ask about the PLL and the MLL, that's fine. And, those kind of things. And now I'm doing the Blue Ridge thing, and you feel like, geez, I'm really making a difference in some young kids' lives, and so, these things, you work hard, you keep your nose clean, and these things generally work out in the end.
Talk briefly about the Chrome, and the first phone call, I'm assuming, comes from Paul Rabel.
Yeah, Paul asked me to actually call me and first asked me to serve on the advisory board, and it was my saying to him, how about if I coach one of the teams, Paul? How'd you feel about that? And he was excited about that possibility, and so we talked about it further, and that's what happened. We had nothing to do with pulling those teams together or deciding which team we were going to coach. We were just basically handed a team name and a roster, and and again, I thoroughly enjoyed being around those guys. But the situation for me was simply that, again, that goes back to Maggie and Emma come home on the weekends, and, they live at Innisfree, and then they come home on the weekends. And every weekend I was flying off somewhere, and again, you get there on a Friday, you don't quite have everybody for practice, the next day, I describe it as, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way at all, but you really, what you have is a good seat for an all-star game, and so again, I enjoyed being around all those guys and all, but it just felt like this is taking a lot of time away for, and then and so again, when the Blue Ridge thing came up, at first I told them, no, I don't think I'm going to do that either. And then I went and took another look, and I decided to give it a try. And, I'm in my second year now, and we'll see whether or not we stick with it, or, but this actually suits me better than the pros. Maybe the pros were going to be less work somehow, but I'm it goes back to what we talked about. I'm a blue collar guy. I don't play golf. I don't fish well enough. I like to be working, Greg. I like to be busy and stuff. And so I got plenty of that with Blue Ridge, and I'm enjoying what I'm doing right this minute, so.
I want to come back to Blue Ridge, but I have one question. We've had a chance to interview Jim Stignata and Andy and
Yep.
Nancy Laurent. Obviously, John Paul was with you the first year. He's a local guy here who we know pretty well. Can they survive on the traveling circus, or do you see it? This has been sort of a theme that we've had in the conversation with the PLL guys. Can they survive it as the traveling circus from town to town, or does it really have to get back to the old days where you've got a town in Denver, you've got a team in Detroit, you've got a team in Chicago? Have you thought about that at all?
I have thought about it, and I've asked people, how does this league ever stand on its own, and you know, everybody's happy about the television piece of it. The television, the production quality is very good, right, very good. And people are the viewership is increasing in number and stuff. But frankly, it's still just a small segment of the ESPN world. I mean, we still get dominated by softball and things like that, and so I don't think that I'm not sure that property is ever going to be valuable enough for ESPN to say, all right, we're going to pay you for this, then like you're saying, the moving around, are you ever going to attract enough people in the stands to, again, you're flying 150 people to these cities every weekend, putting them up in hotels and stuff. It's a pretty big nut, and so I don't know how the league, professional lacrosse, ever weans itself off of the corporate dollar. What you do have in lacrosse is a lot of guys on Wall Street that played lacrosse and are willing to make an investment in an activity that they love and they loved and still love, and so how does the PLL, I mean, in a perfect world, the PLL would like to say, we don't need that to survive, but I'm not sure how you get from one place to the other place. I'm just not sure. And I'm not sure that, even in the MLL, there were only a couple of markets that really made it work, and so you sort of got to find the perfect towns. How many do you need? 6, 8? We just haven't shown that we can draw that kind of audience in the summer times. Now, if the sport moves to the spring, would it do better? Maybe, maybe. Again, I think there's lots of question marks. So you give Paul and Michael credit for what they've done and the legwork that they've done on Wall Street, getting that funding in place. And but they're probably going to have to maintain those relationships for a while until we determine for certain whether or not it can stand on its own. And I'm not convinced that it can happen, and so we're going to have to wait and see.
ESPN's offering a third of what NBC offered. That's part of it. And when you have a final where roughly 20,000 seats and you're only filling 12 of them for a national final on national television, it doesn't lend itself for the greatest opportunities, but we'll see.
No, and so NBC offers a more attractive package, and which the PLL does, which you understand that they want to take advantage. But in retrospect, maybe they would have been better off on ESPN, who that's what people watch. That's what Sports Center. And there wasn't enough PLL. The one thing that lacrosse does, it produces unbelievable highlights, and I think it would have dominated ESPN if they had that property. But there was it was an NBC property and stuff. So that's the balancing decisions. Those are the hard decisions that Paul and Michael and those guys have to make at that level. Is what do they do next now?
We talked to Steve Gouvert, who's the San Diego Seals president.
Yep.
With the NLL. He's the president of the NLL. He mentioned an interview a year ago that he wasn't sure how the value of, separating the seasons made sense, certainly, because you could have guys playing in both directions. But he thought that the jump and the switch was going to help the NLL dramatically because they just don't have, they're filling 15,000 seats in Denver. They're filling 8,000 seats in Hamilton, so on and so forth. He thought that because of the switch, and it turns out that if you turn on ESPN with the application, watch any NL game you want, and they're all, both the places are packed.
They're played indoors. The weather's always perfect, so it just that people don't have that that attachment in the summer, that need in the summer to go sit outside. They don't feel that same thing that they do, indoors. I can go indoors. I know that I'm going to be comfortable, and so they're just it's not the same game, so.
Last question. This kind of goes back with Blue Ridge a little bit. We're both in the fourth quarter of this process. And
what? Is that true?
Well, I'm pretty well
I'm with you, Greg. I think about it. Go ahead.
So my question, being in the fourth quarter, and I have a feeling you're a bit of a compulsive personality, which is why I probably have fallen in love with you from this interview, because I think there's a lot of similarities into type A personalities. My question, you appreciate more today being in that fourth quarter, and then also appreciate what was behind it than you might have 10 years ago?
Um, yes, and probably because I've just had more time to consider it. When you're in the middle of it, these college guys right now, all they're thinking about is the next game. I've had time to be in my car and drive to games and do some things and consider what the arc of my career has been like, where it's taken me. How did I get here? And now with these Blue Ridge kids, things that bothered me with college guys, these kids are confronting. I'm not all of a sudden I'm not playing. I feel like just I've got a little experience. I can talk to you about this. So I'm thoroughly enjoying that piece of it. The personal piece of it, kind of helping these kids grow up, and lacrosse is a tool. So the answer to your question is I probably do appreciate it more now. And the other piece of it is, Greg, I used to always say that this is more about the relationships. And I was at a camp one time, and I was saying that more than the championships, it's about the relationships. And Mike Preston was sitting next to me, and he's giving me one of these, going, "Hey, Dom, that's easy to say when you've won 4 championships, And so I'm a little bit more mindful of my language than I might have been otherwise. But since I left Virginia, those guys, those Brown and Virginia guys, have talked to me in a way that they never would have otherwise, except, they would talk about me at my funeral, and so they've sort of cut, it's been a lot of, I really need to say this to you, Coach. I really appreciate something, the influence you had on the way I heard your voice in my voice when I was talking to my kid the other day. It's so gratifying to have guys say that, and to realize that you had some positive influence in somebody's life, and whatever legacy I happen to have, it's going to carry over in the lives of these other guys and in my children, and what more could you ask for, really?
My wife and I have been able to attend eight weddings last summer, just from girls that had played for state. And same kind of thing. All of a sudden, you're in the corner it's a club team. It's not even an NCAA team, but it's the process of those relationships. I wanted to thank you for this. I after talking to you now for about an hour, I feel like I could just want to run through a wall. You must have been inspirational to the guys that played for you, and I can't tell you how much I have enjoyed this conversation. And I wanted to thank you for that and for your career, because it's been really fun to watch, and what a treat to talk to you.
Greg, thank you very much. I love talking about these things, and and again, if I can help somebody at all, then it makes it all even a little bit more worthwhile. And so I appreciate that you asked me to do this, and hopefully you and I will catch up down the road here also.
Thanks. I want to thank Dom Starsia for joining us today on the Michigan Lacrosse Review. I mentioned to him at the end of the interview, I was ready to run through a wall. That hasn't changed. This was a great opportunity to talk to Dom. If you watch the interview, and understand why he was such a successful coach. For all the guys in back, we want to thank Dom. We'll see you next week with another interview.